going to cover the top 9 aggressive ways to counter these pins, and even using just 1 or 2 of them will surely increase your winning percentage significantly. Here comes the first example, and here the most played move by black is indeed bishop to b4. They want to pin your knight as well as to create this threat to your pawn on e4, which is no longer defending. Now what do you do here? In most cases white tries to defend his position one way or the other, but the winning shot for white is queen a4. So the thing is, if they bring the bishop out before they're castling, you've got this double attack which just wins this bishop for nothing on the next move. The second way to handle such pins came from brilliant Mikhail Tal, and his idea was to just push your own attacking plan and ignore this pin completely. Therefore, in this position, after black has played bishop to g4, he ignored it and simply castled. You say, okay, you want to pin my knight? No problem. Black plays pawn c5, wants to challenge white's center. White ignores it completely once again and just goes knight e4. He wants to bring his pieces closer to black so that he can attack later on. Now, this actually involves a pawn sacrifice on d4, but now after pawn c5, white starts attacking. The knight has to move somewhere, and here comes knight d6, the first gain of white. Now the king has to move and can no longer castle after that. And after king to e7, how would you continue white's attack? Tal does it in a really spectacular fashion. He ignores this pin and just goes knight to d4. Very often your opponent can overlook the fact that this knight can actually move, although it involves a sacrifice of your queen, but in this case you're actually having something at hand. If black decides to take on d1, here comes rook takes f7 checkmate. Quite a beautiful stuff. But black noticed that, and therefore he played knight takes e5. So far it looks like the position is complicated. Yes, the king is exposed, but so is your queen. These knights are also shaky. But Tal found a brilliant way to finish it off with queen takes g4. So that's the completely brutal punishment of that bishop who dared to pin your knight. And I mean, the tactical motif is basically similar. If knight takes, rook takes f7 will come with a checkmate. Black noticed this thing just as well, so he didn't take there, and he instead played bishop to take c5. It still looks a little bit messy because all these knights are under the attack as well as the queen, but here comes rook takes f7 and black just resigned. Black is completely overwhelmed by white's attack. If knight takes, queen takes e6, and although these knights are about to be lost, they're still doing their job, and after king goes queen takes f7 would be a checkmate. The third way is an extremely common tactical pattern which is definitely worth remembering. If black goes bishop g4 in similar positions, you can actually sacrifice your bishop on f7, and after king takes, you bring your knight either to g5 or e5. In this case, the e5 is controlled, so knight to g5 check to the king, which enables you to regain your bishop on the next move with interest. You want a pawn, expose the king, and got a completely winning position. Queen a6 is coming, and all in all, white is winning. Again, that works across multiple different openings, a very useful tactical motif. In this case, the situation is slightly different. You cannot play bishop takes f7 because this bishop is on h5, not on g4, so it can just go back and recapture your bishop, so that thing will not work. And yet there's another common tactical motif known as legal checkmate, but you can see that it works in different situations, not only in the classical fashion. What it involves is knight takes e5, giving up the queen here, which black must capture, because if not, you're going to capture yourself that bishop. So bishop takes d1, and it turns out that your knight on e5, together with this bishop from b3, are ready to initiate a powerful attack against black's king. So bishop takes f7, king e7, bishop g5 check. In some positions there is knight to d5 available, but here bishop g5 is better because knight d5 is controlled by black. So bishop g5 attacks the king. So basically your idea is, yes, you gave up your queen, but you're gonna get his king and win the game that way. Now the only move available for black is king going forward to d6. Now we keep chasing it, knight e4, king takes e5, pawn f4, we'll keep attacking it. And the only way for black is to go forward actually. King f5 is not an option because of knight g3. Quite a beautiful checkmate. So king d4 is forced, and here white takes on d1, not even to gain a bishop, but rather to involve your rook into the attack. And here we have a weird situation where it looks more or less like a normal chess game, but somehow black got his king here in the middle of the board on d4. Besides that, you're also threatening the queen. Black decided to play bishop to e7, and let this be our puzzle of the day actually. It is white to play and win, and if you can't find the winning solution, please write it down in the comments below. Here comes number 5 in our list, and it's also one of the very common questions that you guys have asked me in comments. What if, in that situation, after your opponent brings his bishop here to g4, and let's say you play pawn to h3, what if your opponent simply trades on f3? Does that finish all your attacking ideas? Not really. So after bishop takes and you recapture, you may notice a couple good things for you. First off, this bishop played a couple moves and then just was traded off, therefore you're gaining this advantage in activity. Also, if you're taking a look at your bishop, it is putting strong pressure on black long term, versus if you take a look at this knight, oops, not this, if you take a look at this knight, it has nowhere to go, right? This square is controlled by you, so is this one, and the h5 square is controlled by the queen. Therefore, the knight can not really move at all, right? And even if black tries, with the other knight, let's say in the future, it can play c3 and it'll be a similar situation that knight will have no squares to go. All in all, what I mean to say here is that your bishop is actually stronger and is putting this long-term pressure on black's position, giving you a significant positional advantage. Also, whenever your opponent trades off his light square bishop, that weakens his light squares, and you gotta keep an eye on that. There are often tactical opportunities for you to make use of those weaknesses. For example, in this position, you can actually play queen b3 and win the game on the spot by attacking two of these weaknesses, and black cannot defend them really. For example, if he tries to defend this f7 pawn by playing something like this, then you grab this pawn on b7 and you're ready to gobble up the rook in the corner. And if black goes queen c6, you can go inside with queen c8, but bishop b5 is even stronger. And you can see that all these light squares in black's position are terribly weak, and you're constantly making use of them with your multiple tactical threats. Having said that, I do understand that not in every position you've got an opportunity to rush into a winning attack straight away. Nevertheless, you're going to maintain your positional advantage and convert it slowly but surely. Now, that is a separate subject really, the positional play, so if you want to dive into it, I recommend checking out my free masterclass, which I'll link up there and in the description below the video, where I cover that in greater depth. The way number 6 is kind of funny. It is letting your opponent to execute his threat. So here's what I mean. Instead of trying to play h6, pushing this bishop away, we just ignore it for the time being and we simply castle. Now what white usually wants to do with this spin is to continue with knight to d5 and then trade off on f6 one way or the other and expose your king. And here black says, okay, you want to expose my king? Go ahead. He simply slides his king to h8, and after knight takes f6, pawn takes, bishop h6, it looks like white has achieved what he wanted to get. He disrupted your pawn structure. Now the g file is opened, but here is the catch. You're the one who's going to use this open file, and that's the reason for you to slide your king to h8. And now you're about to start your counterattack along the g file, and it can be extremely dangerous. You've got this rook pointing towards his king. You've got this bishop ready to go out either to g4 or h3 and put pressure here on the king side as well. You've got this bishop, which is also looking towards the king. Knight is ready to jump to d4, and you can see how dangerous it can get for white. For example, in this game, he played bishop c4, trying to convince your rook to go off the g file, but black played rook to g6, hitting this bishop. White played queen d2, here knight d4. It's just an example thing. Of course, black could play different moves, and here black played a mysterious move, queen to d7. White couldn't figure out what's the issue here and just grabbed the bishop, but it turns out that rook takes g2 is just winning the game on the spot. Quite a sweet revenge for white, who tried to make this g file work against you, but now you're actually finishing it off with your own attack along the g file. So after king h1 and this forcing variation, bishop h3, and there is no defense against queen to g2 checkmate. The way number 7 is to counterattack on the queen side. Whenever your opponent brings his bishop to the king side to pin your knight, the downside is that his queen side is left undefended, and that always gives you an idea to go there and start attacking something on the queen side one way or the other. In this game, white played knight a5 first, and after bishop h5, this bishop can no longer go back, which is nice. And here after pawn takes, as we discussed earlier, what you can do is to attack light squares on the queen side. Okay, so you can consider moves such as queen a4, hitting the king, or the other one is queen b3, putting pressure here as well as here. And that actually is quite troublesome for black, because if they ever go something like b6, that weakens this diagonal terribly badly. And very often you can break open in the center with something like e4, go bishop b5, and you're just killing it that way. So that's pretty bad for black. In the game they tried queen b6, but now white played g4, quite a shocking move. White just keeps attacking, trying to seize that initiative, and the idea is if bishop goes back you can go g5 and drive that knight away, and if they try to capture this pawn, for example in this game they took here first and then took on g4, now this knight no longer defends the pawn on d5, and after knight takes, we're coming up with the threat of knight c7, forking the king and rook, and black is quite defenseless. So that's how quickly your counterattack on the queen side got effective. By the way, besides knight to c7, you're even threatening knight b6, taking advantage of this pin, which would be a fancy way to win the game. If they ever try knight a6, you can just sacrifice your rook there to eliminate the defender, and then you go inside with knight to c7 check anyway, and here you're up a piece and you win the game. The way number 8 is to harass that bishop and to launch your own attack on the king side. After your opponent has played bishop g5, you play h6, initially just pretending that you want to force him to trade or something like that, but after a bishop to h4, all of a sudden you go all out with your attack with the move pawn to g5. Now after a bishop g3, this bishop is kind of locked there, you see it has nowhere to go, but besides that you are ready to play pawn h5, pawn h4, and just launch this extremely quick and efficient attack on the king side. By the way, h4 threatens to actually win this bishop on the next move. Now this variation is a little bit complicated because here you're giving up the pawn on g5, although it's worth it and you're winning after pawn h4. But if you don't want to get into complications, what you can do instead of playing h5 immediately is playing bishop g4, beating down these knights that can no longer capture a pawn, and then execute your main threat with h5, h4 and launching that quick kingside attack. If they try pawn h3, you're okay with that because your idea is just to push your pawns forward quickly. And now white is already defenseless. For example, if knight goes to c3, you can play pawn g4, and either you're gonna take there and then play h4, or he is gonna exchange, giving you this very juicy open file, and you're just winning. If queen goes forward, you can go rook h5, and that even traps the queen. If queen goes back somewhere, I mean, the only thing you gotta do is to bring your queen towards the h file and then checkmate him there, right? So you can do it one way or the other. The most straightforward way is to go king e7, queen g8, queen h7, queen h1, checkmate. And as simple as it looks, there is nothing white can do really to stop that. And in the final example, let me address one of the common questions that you guys have asked me. What if you have castled already and your opponent goes bishop g5 after that, so that if you try going pawn h6 and pawn g5, what he may try doing is to sack his knight on g5 and open up your king that way while maintaining his pin. While this may look scary at first, if you know the right way to counter that, you're gonna gain the upper hand. So there are a couple of ways. First off, just so that you remember, there is a move bishop e6, which is always a useful move to play. Bishop e6 involves your bishop in the game, as well as neutralizes his pressure along this diagonal, and controls the d5 square just in case, so that if he ever tries to bring his knight there, you can always trade it off. Therefore, bishop e6 is always a good move to play in these positions, and you're completely safe after that. But there is even a more aggressive approach. The more aggressive approach is similar to one of the ideas we discussed previously. It is when you try to use that g-file against white. So while white tried to attack you there, you're actually overpowering him on the king side. So you're going to play rook g8 and use that file for your own attack. And as always, we've got this active bishop, we've got another bishop pointing towards the king, and there's no wonder that your attack is going to be extremely effective. What if he goes queen to f3, attacking your knight that way? You cannot move away because it's pinned down to the queen. But you can play a brave move king to g6. Now, if you are familiar with this idea, it's very hard to play a move like that during a real game because it seems reckless to move your king forward. But if you are familiar with this idea, then you'll be able to play it easily. So what's the idea? Not only you're defending the knight, but you're actually counter-attacking. Like your king is taking a very active part in your attack. And if he decides to trade everything on f6, you're happy, right? Because you're up a piece, so you'll win this endgame. It's much more likely that he'll try to go something like queen g3 and keep attacking you along the g-file. But here comes a really juicy counter blow. In fact, you've got even two of them. Either knight takes e4 or knight to h5, counter-attacking his queen. So that's how you do it. Knight h5, for example. And although you're giving up your queen, you're going to capture his. And white has to go for this line, because if queen moves, you're going to grab his bishop. Therefore, he has to go for this line. Bishop takes, knight takes g3. Now your king is completely safe in an endgame because we traded queens off. Also, notice that this pawn is pinned, cannot move, and therefore it means that his rook is under the attack as well as the bishop, and white's going to lose even more material on the next move. For example, if he does something and you grab this rook, and now you're actually up a rook in an endgame and you're going to win this easily.